Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep into modern South Korea today.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, we've got some really fascinating excerpts from Korea, the Impossible Country. This book, it's by Daniel Tudor,
Oh, yeah, I've heard of it.
and we're going to try to really extract, some key insights into what makes South Korean society tick.
It's such a fascinating country, isn't it? Full of contradictions.
It really is. I mean, you might think you know South Korea from, K-pop and kimchi, but we're going to go way deeper.
Right. Beyond the stereotypes.
Exactly. We're talking history, culture, their economy, even their global impact these days. So get ready for some seriously surprising facts.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will be surprised by what they discover about South Korea.
Definitely. One of the first things that just blew me away was the sheer scale of their economic transformation. We're talking going from utter poverty in the 1960s to becoming this global economic powerhouse.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it? That's the miracle on the Han River.
The miracle on the Han River. How did they do it? What's the secret sauce?
Well, you can't tell that story without talking about General Park Chung-hee and, his policies. He basically instilled this culture of, hardcore work ethic.
Right. I read that South Koreans work the longest hours of any country in the OECD. That's intense.
Yeah, and, they also embraced this export-oriented growth model, driven in large part by those massive family-run conglomerates, the K-ball.
Ah, the K-ball. Those names are everywhere. Samsung, Hyundai, LG.
Exactly. They're synonymous with South Korea's economic rise. But, there's a flip side to this intense focus on growth.
There's always a flip side, right? What's the downside here?
Well, while the cable system definitely helped propel South Korea to economic success, it also created this insanely competitive environment.
So there's a lot of pressure to succeed.
Immense pressure.
Yeah.
And sadly, it's contributed to a very high suicide rate in South Korea.
That's heartbreaking. It's a reminder that progress, it often comes with a price. It seems like South Korea is a nation of extremes, this incredible economic success on one hand, but a heavy toll on individual well-being on the other. But what about Korean culture beyond these economic realities? What about their art, their music, their way of life?
Well, one thing Tudor really challenges is the perception of Koreans as, reserved or unemotional. He introduces these two really powerful concepts, Han and Hung.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Han and Hung, what are those?
Han, it's like this deep collective sense of sorrow that's rooted in their history, all the turmoil they've gone through.
I can see how that would leave a mark.
It does. And then Hung is like the opposite. It represents pure joy, almost ecstatic joy.
So it's like a pendulum swing between these two extremes.
Precisely. And it shapes their cultural expression in really interesting ways. Think about those wild celebrations when South Korea co-hosted the 2002 World Cup.
Oh, yeah. I remember seeing those images. Streets were packed. Everyone was going crazy.
That was Hung in full force. And then you contrast that with the melancholic beauty of so much Korean cinema, those films that explore themes of loss and resilience.
Right, there's a certain sadness, a depth of emotion there.
Yeah, and that reflects Han.
So it's like these two forces, Han and Hung, they coexist and kind of shape their cultural identity. That's fascinating. It makes you want to, dig deeper and understand how these cultural nuances play out in their daily lives.
And that's where Jong comes in. This uniquely Korean form of deep connection, deep loyalty.
Okay, Jong. I've heard that word before, but it's hard to translate directly, right?
It is. It's like this profound sense of connection and obligation, this unspoken bond.
Deeper than just friendship.
Much deeper. Tudor even gives this example of someone choosing a business partner based on Jong, even though they had a better offer from someone else.
Wow, that's incredible. They prioritize that personal connection over, cold, hard cash.
They did. Because Jong is about more than just transactions. It's about trust, shared experiences, this deep sense of loyalty.
So it's they value those relationships above all else.
You got it. They prioritize the wuri, the in-group. But there's a flip side to this too, right?
There's always a flip side. We've learned that much.
Right. While Jong creates incredibly strong bonds within those in-groups, it can also lead to the exclusion of outsiders, what they call the Nam.
Ah, so it's like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. And sometimes this favoritism, which they call jangshil, can even fuel corruption,
It's a reminder that even the most positive values can have, unintended consequences.
It's true.
And speaking of cultural nuances, I know we can't overlook the concept of kemyeon, or face. I've heard this is huge E in South Korea.
Yeah, it really is. It shapes social interactions in a way that, most Westerners probably wouldn't even realize.
So Kimyeon, it's like about saving face, avoiding embarrassment.
Right. It's about that, but it goes so much deeper. It's like woven into the fabric of their society.
Okay, so it's not just being polite. How does it manifest?
Well, Kimyeon influences everything, from everyday conversations to big business decisions. Like, Tudor mentioned how financial analysts might actually downplay criticisms of a company.
Even if they're recommending it as an investment.
Even then. Yeah. Because they don't want to cause someone to lose face.
That's so different from how we do things here.
It is. And, advertisers in Korea, they tend to highlight, like, the positive aspects of their own products without, directly dissing their competitors.
So it's more about subtle persuasion than like in-your-face comparisons.
Exactly. It's all about maintaining this harmonious public image.
But haven't we talked about how there's this intense pressure to succeed in Korean society? Does Kimyeon contribute to that pressure?
Unfortunately, yes. This constant need to uphold a perfect public image, it can be incredibly stressful.
Oh, I can imagine. Always having to present this flawless facade.
Right, and it's definitely a contributing factor to South Korea's tragically high suicide rate.
That's so sad. And it sounds like it's especially tough on young people.
It is. Think about those high school students facing the dreaded Sunyung exam.
The Suning, right? That's like their college entrance exam.
Yeah, and it basically determines their entire future. The pressure is unbelievable.
So this need to save face, it's like a double-edged sword. It helps to maintain social harmony, but it also adds to this like immense pressure to be perfect.
Precisely. It's a complex cultural dynamic.
It really is. And it makes you think about how these pressures impact like their homes, their living spaces. I'm kind of picturing these super modern, sleek apartments.
Well, that's definitely part of the story. South Korea has undergone rapid urbanization, so most people do live in modern apartments now. But Tudor actually takes us on this fascinating journey from traditional hanex to those high-rises.
Wait, hanex, those are those beautiful wooden houses with the curved roofs, right?
Exactly. And they're not just pretty to look at. They're designed according to Pungsujiri, basically the Korean version of feng shui.
Feng Shui. So it's about like energy flow and harmony with nature.
You got it. They consider the positioning of the house in relation to mountains and rivers, all sorts of things.
Wow, that's so cool. But I imagine like most people in modern South Korea aren't living in hanex anymore.
You're right. But there's this growing movement to preserve and even modernize hanex.
Really? So it's like they're trying to hold on to those traditions even as they're modernized.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between preserving their heritage and embracing progress.
And speaking of tradition and innovation, we got to talk about Korean food. I'm ready to go way beyond kimchi. I know Korean food is so much more than just spice and fermentation, but like, what are some of the hidden gems?
Ooh, you're in for a treat. Korean cuisine is incredibly diverse. They emphasize fresh, seasonal ingredients, and they have this incredible mastery of fermentation.
Yeah, gochujang, doenjang, ganjang, those are all staples, right?
Absolutely. But have you ever heard of hanjio?
Hongeo, that doesn't sound familiar.
Well, get ready. It's fermented skatefish.
Wait, fermented fish. That sounds interesting.
It's definitely an adventure for the taste buds.
Yeah.
But for something a little less, shall we say, pungent, there's dagalbi, spicy stir-fried chicken, and samgitang ginseng chicken soup.
And we can't forget bibimbap. I love a good bibimbap.
Bibimbap is a classic, but Tudor actually makes this interesting point about its global appeal.
Really? What's that?
He suggests that bibimbap, despite being delicious, its presentation, all mixed up, might actually be hindering its popularity on a global scale.
Huh. I never thought about that. It's like even with something as universally loved as food, those cultural nuances still matter.
Absolutely. And speaking of interconnectedness, we've got to talk about how South Korea is navigating this whole idea of identity in a globalized world. It's a nation that's embracing multiculturalism on one hand, but still grappling with these deeply rooted ideas of ethnic nationalism.
Right. We're talking about minjok, right? That concept of shared bloodline that defines Korean identity.
Exactly. But then you have this increasing reality of diversity in South Korea. They've seen a surge in international marriages, particularly with women from other Asian countries.
So how are those foreign brides fitting into Korean society?
Well, Tudor points out that they often face challenges integrating, which highlights this persistent influence of ethnic nationalism.
It sounds like a society that's kind of caught in between, trying to reconcile those traditional values with the realities of a more diverse population.
It is. And the government is definitely trying to address this.
They're actively promoting multiculturalism.
They are. But it's a work in progress for sure. It's a reflection of these complex dynamics at play in modern South Korea.
It's a fascinating case study, really. It makes me think about how these demographic and social shifts are impacting, like, the South Korean workforce, especially that famous work ethic they're known for.
That's a great point. And, those industrial soldiers we were talking about, that generation that powered South Korea's economic miracle, that model is being challenged.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more about how the South Korean workforce is evolving.
Well, we got to start by unpacking the concept of the industrial soldier.
Okay, let's do it.
So the industrial soldier, right. It's more than just a catchy phrase.
Right. It's a whole mindset, a way of life.
Exactly. They dedicated themselves, like body and soul, to rebuilding South Korea after the Korean War.
Putting the needs of the nation above their own.
Exactly. And their hard work, their sacrifice, it laid the foundation for everything that came after.
It's like a whole generation driven by duty and patriotism. But as South Korea modernized, things started to change, right? Did younger generations just not have that same work ethic?
It's not quite that simple. I mean, it's more nuanced than that.
Okay, so what shifted?
Well, you've got globalization, the 1997 Asian financial crisis, and also, a growing awareness of workers' rights.
So it's like a combination of economic forces and evolving social values.
Exactly. And it's led to some pretty significant changes for Korean workers.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, one of the biggest changes has been the decline of lifetime employment. Back in the day, Korean companies, they often offer their employees jobs for life.
Whoa, a job for life. That's pretty much unheard of these days.
It is, right. But that system started to break down. Companies faced more competition, they needed more flexibility, and today you see a lot more temporary and contract work.
So less job security, less of that like traditional loyalty between companies and workers.
Exactly. And it's created a lot of anxiety for people.
I bet. Especially for those who grew up expecting that job for life. It's a whole different world now. So how are Korean companies adapting to this new reality?
Well, it's interesting. This shift also reflects changes within the workplace itself. Remember how we talked about Kimyeon, saving face and avoiding confrontation?
Yeah, that whole unspoken code of conduct.
Well, that traditional emphasis on hierarchy and seniority, it's being challenged too.
By you.
Younger generations. Those who grew up with, more exposure to Western ideas, they're less likely to just blindly follow the old ways.
Right. They want more autonomy, more work-life balance.
Exactly. They question authority, they voice their opinions.
Which probably makes some of those older bosses uncomfortable.
We could say that. It's a clash of values, for sure.
It's like those Confucian values we discussed earlier. They're kind of getting a stress test in the face of globalization.
That's a great way to put it. And it all ties back to English mania, too. It's not just about individual ambition anymore. It's about equipping yourself to compete in a globalized job market.
Right, where English fluency is like a must-have. So how's this demand for English playing out in the workforce?
Well, for one thing, it's fueling this huge industry. You've got the Hagwons, those private academies, they're everywhere. But there's also been this massive wave of foreign English teachers coming to South Korea.
I've heard about that. It's like a rite of passage for a lot of young people to go teach English in Korea.
It is. It's a global exchange, right? People from all over the world coming to teach and experience a different culture.
Sounds pretty cool. But I'm guessing it's not all sunshine and roses.
You're right, there are definitely challenges. Cultural differences, language barriers, sometimes unrealistic expectations, and the quality of the teaching can vary a lot. Some Hagwons are excellent, others not so much.
So it's like they're trying to figure out how to meet this huge demand for English while also making sure the education is good.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, for sure.
It all goes back to that idea of South Korea navigating its place in the world. And we can't talk about that without talking about North Korea, right?
Right.
And their relationships with China and Japan. That's a whole lot of history, a lot of tension.
It is. And Tudor goes into this concept of defensive nationalism in South Korea. It comes from their history, being invaded and dominated by bigger powers.
So they've got to be on guard, protect their identity.
Exactly. It's this legacy of trauma that's shaped how they see the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's created this kind of paradox where they're embracing globalization, but also fiercely protecting their own culture.
So they're looking outward and inward at the same time.
Exactly. And this tension is probably most obvious in their relationship with North Korea. Two halves of a nation, divided for over 70 years. Imagine that.
It's such a unique situation. How do South Koreans even view North Korea? It must be complicated.
It is. You've got fear, anger, resentment, but also this shared history, maybe even a longing for reunification.
So many emotions all mixed together.
Right. And it's different for different generations. Older generations, they tend to view the North with more hostility, understandable because they lived through the Korean War.
They saw the devastation firsthand.
Exactly. But younger generations, they often have a more nuanced view.
It's like they're less burdened by the past.
You could say that. And this difference, it affects how they see reunification too.
So, is reunification like a top priority for most South Koreans?
It's a national aspiration, sure, this ideal symbolic thing. But practically speaking, it's not so simple.
What do you mean?
Think about it. Absorbing a country like North Korea, the economic challenges alone would be huge.
Not to mention the political differences.
Exactly. Integrating two totally different systems, it wouldn't be easy. And then you have the whole question of ideological compatibility. South Koreans are proud of their democracy. They're not going to just throw that away.
So, reunification, emotionally it's powerful, but in reality, it's a tough one.
It is. But, beyond all these big geopolitical issues, it's important to remember that South Korea is also a nation of individuals, people with their own hopes, dreams, anxieties.
Right. We can't forget the human side of things. So, what are some of the things that, shape daily life for Koreans beyond the headlines?
Well, Tudor, he dives into a bunch of different things, from their drinking culture to the whole English mania thing. He even talks about the evolution of their food beyond just, kimchi.
Yeah, we got to circle back to that drinking culture. I hear Koreans take it pretty seriously.
They do. And it's not just about having fun. It plays a big role in their social and professional lives. Remember washik?
Those after-work drinking parties, right?
Yep. Those are considered essential for team bonding. It's almost part of the job.
Wow, really? It's like a social lubricant for their work culture.
Exactly. But those washik, they can get pretty intense.
How so?
Well, there's a big emphasis on group drinking. And refusing a drink from your boss, that's a big no-no.
It's all about saving face again, isn't it? Chemyeon strikes again. So what do they drink at these gatherings?
Soju is the go-to. That's like their national drink, distilled rice liquor.
Soju, I've heard of that. It's like their version of vodka, right?
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
But sweeter. But they have other stuff too, like macchioli, which is this milky rice wine.
Interesting. And what about the food? Do they have specific snacks to go with the drinks?
Oh, yeah. They call it onju.
Mm-hmm.
And the variety is crazy. Spicy stews, grilled meats, fried stuff, all kinds of things. It's like Korean bar food, but way more sophisticated.
Anju, I gotta try some of that.
Yeah.
But beyond food and drink, what else shapes daily life for Koreans?
Well, you can't ignore their emphasis on education. Tudor calls it education fever.
Right. They're famous for that, aren't they?
They are. And it all comes back to this pressure to succeed, not just for themselves, but for their families, their country.
We've talked about the Sunyoung, their college entrance exam, but it sounds like this pressure starts way before that.
Oh, yeah. It starts in kindergarten. It's like a lifelong pursuit of academic excellence. Good grades, prestigious universities, high-paying jobs, the whole 9 yards.
It sounds exhausting.
It can be. And, it's not all positive.
What do you mean?
Well, all this focus on rote learning, memorization, it can stifle creativity, critical thinking.
So it's like they're producing great test takers, but not necessarily well-rounded individuals.
Right. That's something a lot of people are worried about in South Korea, how to balance this drive for excellence with, nurturing well-rounded people.
It's a tough balance, isn't it?
It is. And you see that same dilemma with English media, too. It's not just about language. It's about culture, identity, all of that. We need to unpack that more.
English mania, definitely. It's a whole topic in itself. Let's dive into that next.
Okay, English mania. I'm ready to dive in. It's more than just wanting to learn a new language. Right?
It goes way deeper than that. It's tied to their whole relationship with the U.S., especially since the Korean War.
Right. The U.S. has had a massive influence on South Korea, culturally, economically, everything.
Yeah. And English is seen as the key to unlocking all of that. If you want to make it in the world, you got to speak English.
So it's about opportunity, but also maybe fitting in with that globalized world.
Exactly. And it's reinforced by the fact that a lot of South Korea's most successful people, They all speak English. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
So the more successful people speak English, the more everyone else feels like they got to learn it too.
Exactly. And it's created this massive industry. We talked about the HAG ones, right? Those private academies are everywhere. But there's also this huge influx of foreign English teachers coming to Korea. Yeah, I've heard about that. It's like on everyone's bucket list, go teach English in Korea for a year.
It is. And for many of them, it's a great experience. They get to travel, immerse themselves in a new culture. But Tudor also points out some of the challenges they face.
Like what?
Well, there can be cultural misunderstandings, obviously, and sometimes unrealistic expectations from employers or even students.
Right. And I imagine the quality of the teaching can vary a lot.
It does.
No.
Some HAG ones are amazing, others not so much. Some focus more on rote learning, which isn't really helpful if you want to become truly fluent.
Right. It's not just about memorizing grammar rules. It's about being able to actually communicate. So it sounds like they're trying to find that balance again, meeting this demand for English while making sure the education is actually good.
Exactly. It's a work in progress. But it shows you how South Korea is constantly grappling with these complex issues as they become more globalized.
Yeah, it's not easy figuring out how to engage with the world while also holding on to your own identity. Which brings us back to the title of Tudor's book, Korea, the Impossible Country. After all this, what do you think makes Korea impossible?
It's such a provocative title, isn't it? It gets you thinking. I think it speaks to this incredible resilience that the Korean people have.
Right. They've been through so much war, poverty, political upheaval, and yet here they are, a global powerhouse.
Exactly. They've achieved what seemed impossible.
Mm.
But the title also, I think, hints at these inherent contradictions that exist within Korean society.
Okay, I see what you mean. They've accomplished so much, but there's also a cost.
Right. That relentless pursuit of progress, it has a dark side. And Tudor asks this really important question. Can a nation that's so driven by achievement, by external validation, also find a way to prioritize happiness, well-being?
It's like, can they win the rat race and still find peace?
Exactly. And it's not just a question for Korea, it's a question for all of us, right?
Right.
In this modern world, how do we balance ambition with, inner peace?
That's the million-dollar question for sure.
It is. But, the encouraging thing is that more and more Koreans are asking themselves these questions. They're realizing that success isn't just about money or status. It's about finding fulfillment, living a meaningful life.
So maybe Korea isn't so impossible after all. Maybe they're showing us that it's possible to evolve to find a new definition of success.
That's a great way to put it. They're rewriting the rules, showing us that change is always possible.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about South Korea and also about myself.
Me too.
I
It's
mean,
really made me think. And, to all our listeners out there, if you want to go even deeper, definitely pick up Korea, The Impossible Country by Daniel Tudor. It's a must-read.
absolutely. It's a book that'll challenge your assumptions, make you question things, and leave you with a whole new perspective on South Korea. And that's what we're all about here at the Deep Dive, getting you to think critically, explore new ideas, and dive deep into the complexities of the world around us. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.